got to get them lost before you get them saved. You got to get them lost before you get them saved. Now, Sam is probably not going to go down in the history books as being one of the great theologians in the world. But what he had to say was absolutely, completely true. You got to get them lost before you get them saved. People need to understand that they are sinners before they are ever going to understand the salvation that Jesus Christ offers. It's just not going to make any sense to them unless they understand their own sin. There are a lot of people in this world that want to hear a positive message. And so there are a lot of preachers who have quit talking about sin. They have stopped focusing on sin. They've stopped talking about the anger of God towards sinners. They have given people what people want to hear. They've given them a positive message. But we need to remember what Sam said. You have to get them lost first. You need to explain to them why sin is serious business. You need to help them to understand just how bad they are and why it matters. Their sin needs to hurt them so much that they are willing to turn away from it. And only after people get to this point are they really able to understand that the good news of the gospel is really good news. Only at that point is it really going to make sense to them. Imagine this. You walk up to some guy on the street and you say these words, Jesus died for you. And that's all you say. What do you think that man is going to think? He's going to think any number of things, but if he doesn't know a whole lot about the Christian, he could think any number of things, but if he doesn't know much about the Christian religion, he's just not going to understand what on earth you're talking about, and he is going to dismiss your words as being unimportant to him. Here's why. If all you say is Jesus died for me, he's going to think, well, why did anybody die for me? Why is that something that's necessary? It just doesn't make any sense. But let's imagine another situation. Let's imagine that you were talking with this guy on the street, and as you were talking with him, he was talking about something that he had been doing wrong. Let's say that he had been bragging about his latest affair, and then you said to him this, well, is it right for you to do that? Is it right for you to have an affair? There are not a whole lot of people in the world that are going to say, yes, it's great for me to have an affair. That's exactly what everybody should be doing. Because deep down we know that we should be doing that sort of thing. But let's say you point his sin out to him to the point that he realizes that it really is sin. And then you say, well, God doesn't want us to commit adultery. And to do something that is wrong, according to God, is to disobey him. And it is to bring shame upon you, and it is to bring punishment upon you. You are a sinner, and the penalty for sin is death. If you take the man to the point where he understands that, and understands it well, then he is prepared to understand the gospel. Once you have told him the bad news, it helps him to understand why the good news is really good news. Jesus Christ died in our place. Jesus Christ took the punishment that we deserve. And anyone who believes in him can have life. They can have a relationship with God. And so when Jesus died for you, that means that he took the punishment of sin that you deserve. And then suddenly that man is going to be able to understand everything that you've been talking about. He's going to be able to understand the nature of the gospel. And it's possible that he will walk away like the young man walked away from Jesus that day. But at least you'll know this. At least you'll know that he really understood. At least you'll know that he made an intelligent choice if he walks away. Here's another way in which we can think about this use of the law and apply it to our lives. Whatever you do when you walk out of here, you need to have the proper attitude towards the law as you study the Bible. You need to understand that the law is only part of the picture, is only part of the message of the Bible, and unless you understand grace, you haven't understood the Bible as well as you should. It's very common for Christians to read the Bible and read it as though it was merely a book that taught us right and wrong. It is very, very common for people to teach their children in this way. And it's not how we should approach the Bible. It's not how we should approach the teaching of our children. Think about this. Think about things that are taught in children's literature. Oftentimes, when you think about a story that's told to children in the church, people talk about the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, and here's the big point that they'll get to at the very end. They'll say, "And you children should obey God. You shouldn't be like Adam and Eve who disobeyed God, but you should obey God." That's true, but it's only part of the story. Or they talk about Pharaoh. They talk about all the things that happened in Egypt. They talk about how bad Pharaoh was, and they say to the kids, "Well, you need to obey God like Moses did. You shouldn't be like Pharaoh because he was a bad guy." That's true, but it's not all the story. Or you talk about the Ten Commandments, and you're talking to the kids, and you say, "Well, you need to obey your parents." That's true, young people. You should obey your parents. But that's also part of the story. And you need to hear the entire story. When we're teaching about sin, we're teaching children that they do not measure up to God's standards. But if that's all that we teach them, then we're really missing the most important part. When you talk about Adam and Eve in the garden, you need to talk about Genesis 3:15. That verse that we've talked about so many times before. We need to talk about how God promised in the garden that one would come who would destroy the works of Satan, who would destroy sin, who would destroy the devil. And there is a chance of grace that is given right there in the story of Adam and Eve. We need to help our children to understand that so that they would turn towards Christ and so that they would believe in Him. When we talk about Pharaoh, then we need to understand that that's part of a bigger story too. God is the one who rescued His people from physical slavery. But that rescue from physical slavery, taking them up out of Egypt, is something that is a picture of salvation that goes throughout the entire Old Testament. Something that reminds us of the grace that is found in Jesus Christ. God is the one who rescues His people from physical slavery, but God is also the one who rescues His people from sin. And that rescue is the greater salvation. And our kids need to understand that. So even when we're teaching the Ten Commandments, we need to remember that preface there. I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, up out of the house of slavery. I am the God who saves you. I am the God who saves you from sin. Understand the Bible. Read it and understand it. Understand that throughout the entire Old Testament, the grace of Jesus Christ is proclaimed. And as you understand that and as you read it, you will understand the message that God has for you and the message that God has for your children as well. And here's the last way that we can apply this to our lives. Don't forget about the rich man that Jesus was talking to that day. When that young man went away, he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. This man was absolutely, positively convinced that he was good enough for God to like him. He was convinced that keeping the law was good enough, and he flattered himself. He said, "I'm such a good guy." He thought that he was good when he really wasn't. And on that day, this man missed out on a relationship with God. And a great part of that was due to his misunderstanding of the law. Just because you're rich doesn't mean that you can't learn from this man's bad example. There are a lot of ways in which we break the Ten Commandments just like he did. Even if you're not rich, even if you don't have a lot of money, you can still worship money. Even poor people love money. There are poor people that love the feel of it in their hands, even if it's only a couple of yen. There are poor people who understand that money is something that can give them pleasure, and they love it. They worship it. They worship it as though it was an idol. And if it